Hey kids, it's time for another chapter of Rowan of Rin. I'm going to read you one poem from Mr. Shel Silverstein. Who can kick a football from here out to Afghanistan? I can. Who fought tigers in the street while all the policemen ran and hid? I did. Who will fly and have X-ray eyes and be known as the man no bullet can kill? I will. Who can sit and tell lies all night? I might. Ridiculous Rose. Her mama said, "Don't eat with your fingers." "Okay," said Ridiculous Rose, so she ate with her toes. Those are fun. All right, kiddos. Chapter 4, Seeing is Believing. Rowan woke and lay panting and shuddering, soaked in sweat. He had no idea what time it was. The dream had seemed to take hours, but it might have only been seconds. Anad slept peacefully on, her mouth slightly open, one hand curled around her soft buksha toy. She at least was having no bad dreams, but the thought of going back to sleep was terrifying to Rowan. He threw back the covers and leapt out of bed. It was very cold. The cool night air was blowing in the window, and his sleeping shirt was wet through. He peeled it off and quickly began pulling on the day clothes that he had left in a pile on the floor when he had changed for bed. Underneath the clothes was the stick that Sheba had hurled at him. He had carried it home, unthinking, and brought it into his room. He picked it up and slid his fingers up and down its length. It was a good stick, straight and thick and so smooth it might have been polished except for one little pointed bump in the middle. That was possibly what had cut his forehead. Rowan decided, and he pushed the soft pad of his thumb against the bump. It was hard and sharp enough. But then the bump moved. It slid forward under his thumb, and the stick began to peel. Rowan gasped as the smooth surface beneath his fingers came away in a fine single sheet, and he pulled at the sheet, fascinated, as more and more of it unrolled. Then he realized that the stick was not a stick at all. It was a tightly rolled piece of parchment. Parchment is like an old-fashioned piece of paper. The little bump in the center had been the catch that held it closed. With a glance at the sleeping Anad, he hurried to light the lamp. She would not wake, and he had to look more closely at this strange thing that he held in his hand, for even in the dimness he could see that the parchment was not blank. There were pictures on it, and lines and words. He had to see what they were. He spread the parchment out on the wooden floor and weighed it down on all four corners with his shoes and Anad's to stop it from curling up, and then he carefully put the lamp beside it and looked. It was a map of the mountain, with a pathway marked in red. Rowan clapped his hands over his mouth to stop himself from calling out. Sheba had played a trick on them. She had pretended to let them down, knowing all the time that Rowan was carrying away just what they needed, knowing that they might never discover what she had given them. How she must have laughed to herself at Strong John's disgust and Marley's disappointment. Rowan rolled the map up tightly again and fastened the clasp, and he pulled his shoes on, and he stood in the middle of his bedroom, his thoughts whirling. "Rowan, what are you doing?" He spun around to meet his mother's startled eyes, and she gaped at him from the doorway, and he blinked at her. Like him, Jiller was fully dressed as if ready to go out. Tongue-tied, he held the rolled-up map. "I had a dream and—" "Oh, Rowan," Jiller said with exasperation. "These nightmares, what am I to do with you, my son?" For a moment, Rowan thought he saw her lips tremble. "And now, this morning—" She broke off and put her hands up to her face. When she lowered them, she was calm again. "If we've wished to bid the mountain party farewell with the rest of the villagers, we must go soon. They leave at dawn. Put down that stick and gather Ned's clothes. I must wake her." And she moved toward the little girl's bed. "Mama!" In his confusion, Rowan had used the babyish word without thinking, and he saw her brow crease and heard her quick indraw breath of irritation. "Mother!" he went on quickly, and so loudly that Anad stirred and began waking up of her own accord. "Mother, I have the map of the mountain." "He has the map of the mountain," Jiller said again to Strong John, ignoring the exclamations of the crowd. Her cheeks were pink with excitement, and her hood was flung back over her shoulders. She looked very beautiful to Rowan, and perhaps she did to Strong John, too, for he was looking at her admiringly. That means he admired her with his eyes. Then quickly, let us see, demanded Brandon, stamping her tough boots in the cold. But I cannot believe this. Why would the old woman try such a trick? Are you sure the boy is not playing the fool? Of course not, snapped Jiller, taking the map from Rowan and passing it to her. See for yourself. Brandon unrolled the parchment and stared at it for a moment, her breath making little puffs of mist in the cold morning air. And then her mouth turned down at the corners, and she passed the parchment to John and Marley. Well, Alan, standing beside Rowan and Jiller, was feverish with curiosity. What is it? What has the boy found? Strong John turned the parchment around to face them. It was completely blank. But, Rowan burst out, it was there, a drawing of the mountain, and words and arrows, and a track marked in red leading to the cloud. Above it, it was. Brandon sniffed and jerked her head toward the empty sheet dangling from John's hand. Seeing is believing, she said, turning away. Small boys should learn that's a big mistake to try playing tricks on their betters to gain attention. Maybe you were dreaming, Rowan said to Alan, patting him on the shoulder. Too much cheese at dinner, maybe? This happens to me sometimes. Things seem to be real. This was real, Jiller broke in. She was frowning, staring at the parchment, as if even now she could not believe her eyes. Rowan held it up to me. I saw it myself. Am I, too, playing tricks on my betters, Brandon? There was an embarrassed pause, and Strong John bit his thumb thoughtfully, and then he passed the parchment back to Rowan. If Jiller and Rowan say the map was there, I believe them, he said, but the fact remains now that it is not. Perhaps Sheba wished to build our hopes and then to send them crashing down. Jiller smiled at him gratefully. That would seem very like her, agreed Marley. And her jaw dropped and she pointed at Rowan. Look, look, she gasped. Rowan, red-faced and startled, found the eyes of the villagers upon him, and people were exclaiming and staring. What was happening? What had he done now? It took him a moment to realize that they were not looking at him, but they were looking down at the parchment in his hand. He glanced down at it, and a stab of shock that he received was immediately followed by a rush of relief and joy. For the map was slowly reappearing, shapes, words, and finally the red-dotted path winding upward. Strong John held out his hand. Rowan, give it to me, he commanded. Eagerly, Rowan surrendered the parchment. John took it and held it up. There was a buzz of excitement and then a groan of dismay from the villagers. For as they watched, the lines and arrows were fading. In moments the parchment was blank and clean again, and John passed it around, and the people stared at it, and it went back from hand to hand, unchanging. It's witchcraft, exploded Neil, thrusting it back to Strong John as if it was poisonous. Sheba is toying with us. I fear she is, John said slowly, and it is a dangerous game she plays. He looked at Marley. I'm very much afraid that Sheba's idea is to make me eat my own words. He put the parchment back into Rowan's hands and watched gravely as once again the marks and the shapes and the lines reappeared on its surface, faint at first, but growing clearer by the second. What does this mean? Cried Jiller, clutching her son's shoulder. Strong John hesitated. Last night, angered by something I told her, Sheba said of Rowan, it would do no harm to be guided by him. I believe that out of spite she has bewitched the map so that it only reveals its secret in Rowan's hands. You are right, Marley said, thinking aloud. She threw it at him last night. She intended him to discover it. She intended that this scene that we have just witnessed should be played out. She paused. Sheba wants that boy to join us on the mountain. No! The words burst from Jiller before she could stop it, and she bit her lip and composed herself. I mean, she went on carefully, Rowan is young, too young to be of any use to you, and he has the bookshop to see to. He cannot go. Of course he cannot, agreed the teacher, Timon, and he pushed his way to the front of the crowd. And I have the solution to this little dilemma. Rowan can hold the map while I copy it with my own ink on my own paper, and he spread out his hands. It may take an hour, and Rowan's arms may tire, but it will be worth it to him. Rowan can then go home to bed, fortunate boy, while you poor fools go off for your little stroll. Yes, said Marley, we will beat Sheba at her own game. She forgets that we are not bookshot to be led so easily. But Sheba had forgotten nothing, for no matter what Timon did, Timon, he could not copy the map. Whenever he tried, the pens he used and discarded one after the other skated across the copying paper as if it were greased butter. and though they worked perfectly if he tried to draw the map or tried to draw anything else. After half an hour he had not succeeded in producing one useful line. Finally he threw away his last pen with a grunt of disgust and sat back on his heels in a mound of scrunched up paper. "Enough," said John. "We are going without the map before. Nothing has changed. We go without the map now." He nodded to Rowan and carefully avoided Jiller's eyes. "We thank you," he said, "for at least we have seen a glimpse of the way, and we will remember much of it, and this will help us. Go home now with your mother." "But this is senseless," snapped Brondon. "The map will ensure our success and safety. We must take it with us, and if the map and the boy are joined by whatever trick, then we must take the boy with us too. Anyone can take his place with the Bookshaws. His attachment to them is foolishness in any case." "We agree with Brondon," said Val. Her brother beside her nodded. "The village depends on this. There is no room for faint-heartedness here." "The boy cannot come," insisted Strong John. "The danger is too great, and he is too young." "Or is it that his mother is too beautiful," remarked Brondon pointedly, "and that your heart is ruling your head, John of the Orchard?" John's face flushed scarlet, and Rowan felt Jiller's arm stiffen and saw her lift her chin while 2 spots of bright color began to burn in her cheeks. "Mama, what's the matter with John?" whispered Anad, pulling at her mother's skirt. "Why is he all red?" Jiller did not reply. Rowan looked down from one face to the other in the crowd, and slowly, with a sinking feeling, the truth came to him. There were other children here of his age, and if this had happened to any of the others, there would be no argument. It would be taken for granted by John and Timon and by their parents and by everyone else that they would go, and they would want to go. It would be a greatest adventure of their lives, their chance to prove themselves heroes. It was because he was the way he was that Strong John was taking this stand. Because he saw it now, Strong John loved his mother and was trying to save her from shame and pain. Rowan began to quiver, and Sheba's words rang out in his ears. "The mountain will not test your courage. It will destroy it." Why had she done this to him? If the mountain could destroy the courage of one such as Strong John, who feared nothing, what could it do to Rowan of Bookshaw, who feared everything? He was filled with dread and loneliness and shame in equal parts, and he could not bear it. He could not bear the rueful eyes of the villagers upon him. They too must be thinking, why him, the most disappointing child in the whole of Rin? By what unlucky chance was he chosen to be their savior when all he could do was let them down? He turned toward his mother, ready to hide her face in his skirt, but just at that moment a picture flashed into his mind. He saw himself standing in the Bookshaw fields, with Stars warm nuzzled bent to his hand, and the other beasts gazing around him, huge, calm, and trusting. He had never disappointed the Bookshaws. He had never let them down. In the frosty early mornings, or in the heat of the sun, when they were injured or giving birth to calves, or when they needed comfort, as the dragon roared, he had been there, and now they needed water, and they would not expect him to fail. To them he was not an undersized, scared weakling. To them he was a leader, guide, and a friend, and they trusted him absolutely. The thought flowed through him like warm, rich milk. He raised his head and looked straight at John. "I will go," he said, and the map he held fluttered in the breeze that always came before the dawn. "I will go with you to the mountain." Chapter 5 is called The Mountain. I forgot to read the last little part before we started again this morning. Yep, even I don't know what happens now, because that's as far as I have read. Alright, kids. I will see you tomorrow morning at Zoom. Hope you're enjoying your Easter. It's a strange Easter. We usually have a big party with like 50 people over at our house, and it's completely quiet. The whole neighborhood's quiet. I hope you're quiet and peaceful. Bye.